so much. You may be seated. I appreciate that you guys sang with me and bear with me, and I very much appreciate Kathy for playing all this music. Oh, I really have a hard time. It's so wonderful. Thanks so much. It's good. All right. Today, if you got your Bible with you, we're going to be in Acts chapter 18, verse 1 through 22. All right? And we're continuing on with Acts. All right? And I tell you, singing those songs makes me think of Acts. Because over and over again, Paul went through hard times. I mean, this whole book of Acts is really Paul's journey through life. I mean, in the epistles you get a little more, but the epistles were written while he was going through this book of Acts. You know, he wrote most of those epistles while we read about him here in Acts. And it wasn't an easy life for him, but just like that song, The Old Rugged Cross, I know one day where I'm going to go because what Jesus has done for me. What kind of an assurance, what kind of a joy, what kind of thing does that give us that no money can buy, that no philosophy can buy? That the Lord came, He paid for all of our sin, everything we'd ever done wrong, so that one day we're going to be with Him forever in glory. And it's guaranteed. It's not a maybe, it's a guarantee for all those who believe upon Him. And I tell you, I think that's how Paul made it. And we're going to read, Paul gets encouraged. Like as Lou said in 18, 9, and 10, there's some big encouragement from the Lord Himself for Paul. So in 18, Acts 18, we got 1 through 22. We're talking about Paul at Corinth. All right? This is Corinth, the same place the book of the Corinthians was written to. They were written to those letters were written to the people in Corinth. Corinth was no easy place to be. All right? One scholar described it as a rip-roaring town where none but the tough could survive. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, had a temple there that was 1,500 feet above the city, and they had over 1,000 cult prostitutes that would come down in the night, in the evening, and be with all the people in the city. And this was like a cutthroat type of town. You know, you've talked about watching some old Westerners in the saloons and all this kind of madness going on. Multiply that, you know, mix that maybe with the Romans and all the other stuff you know about that was going on. This was a city of sin. In fact, the town of Corinthians, they had actors back then too, just like we have plays and things now. If someone was to say, like an actor was, oh, this guy's a Corinthian, that was the drunkard, that was the guy that went with all the prostitutes, that was like the low-life person in the play, was the Corinthian. Because everybody all around knew what it was like in the town of Corinth and what those kind of people were like. It was a city of sin by far, okay? And we look here in the first verse, it says, after these things he left Athens and went to Corinth. And he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, having recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. All right? So Aquila and Priscilla is a husband and wife. All right? They mentioned the lady's name first, then they mentioned the guy's. First the guy, then the lady's name. Aquila and Priscilla. And said they had to leave Rome. It said all the Jews were commanded to leave Rome. Well, if you look in history, the reason all the Jews had to leave Rome, it's written down because a certain man named Trestus was an instigator causing all kinds of trouble, so they forced all the Jews to get out of Rome. All right? Now, if you look elsewhere in history, you won't find anything else about this guy Trestus. So many scholars believe that it was misspelled. It should be Christus. And Christus was a name that they used for Jesus. It was Christus back then. So these followers of Jesus, it got things so rambled up there in Rome, they kicked them all out. So part of those people that got kicked out were Aquila and Priscilla, and they came out here to this place, okay? And he just left Athens, and he came to Corinth, all right? And Corinth is 50 miles west of Athens. And likely Paul, is actually 53 miles. Likely Paul would have walked. Imagine a 53-mile walk. I mean, I don't know if you guys can imagine that. I spent some time in the Army. I never walked 53 miles, but I walked 27 miles once with a pack on my back, and it was painful. All right, I had blisters on blisters at the bottom of my feet. It wasn't a nice walk. So I can imagine 53 miles, and this is in this kind of places going to Corinth. I'm sure if they had all that debauchery there were probably a lot of thieves and thugs and things like that would spread out among the road. It wasn't an easy place where he's going. But Paul was on the mission field, and he was moving. And if you can remember, before Paul was in Athens and he was in Philippi, all right, back in Acts chapter 16, when he was in Philippi, they beat him with rods, like an unnumbered amount of time with rods, and threw him in prison. Horrible stuff had happened to him, you know. The next places he went, he wasn't that well received. Athens, he wasn't that well received. And now he's walking 53 miles to the city of sin, to the city where if you're called a Corinthian, that's like a cuss word. So they're calling you something like the most immoral person that there is. You're calling them a Corinthian. So he's walking. In fact, to Corinthianize, that was the word they had, Corinthianize, it meant whoredom. So if you were to tell somebody that they're being a whore or in whoredom, you could just say, you know, quit being a Corinthian. Quit doing all this Corinthianizing, because that's how bad it was in the city of Corinth. So, in verse 2, he says, he came to them, and because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them. And they were working, for by trade they were tent makers. And he was reasoning in the synagogue every Sabbath in trying to persuade Jews and Greeks. Now this is the only verse in the whole New Testament that actually says that Paul was a tent maker. There's other places that says how he made a living and different things like this, but this specifically points out he was a tent maker. A tent maker was a big deal back then, all right? A lot of people still lived in tents back then, all right? And there's different tent making between whether it's leather or whether it's a bunch of goat hair woven together, but this was a skill that Paul had obtained probably from his father, all right? And if you look at some old philosophy or proverbs or things, it says if you love the son, you teach him a trade, so that way he can go out into the world and make some money, you know, so he can provide a living. Well, probably Paul's trade he was taught was as a tent maker. He still went on to be like a PhD of the Old Testament, you know, being the Pharisee of Pharisees, but this is what his dad had taught him, probably, and this is what he did on the side to make money, to earn a living, all right? So, and he found some other tent makers, all right? So it had something in common with them. And isn't that the way it is with us too? We run into other people we have something in common with. We got an instant bond friendship a lot of times, all right? So he got in there, and what is he doing? He's reasoning in the synagogue every Sabbath, trying to persuade the Jews and Greeks. Everywhere Paul went, the first place he went was the synagogue, all right? This would be surprising, especially after some more in this chapter we're going to read. But Paul had a love for the Jewish people. Paul was a Jew, and Paul had a love for the Jewish people, and he didn't let them stop him from sharing the truth with them. I mean, over and over again, the Jews don't like Paul. The Jews kick him out of the temple. The Jews don't want to listen to him anymore. And what does he do? He goes back to the temple all the time, sharing them in the scriptures, showing them where Jesus is, showing them how he is the prophecy. He is everything fulfilled in Christ. And he's persuading them. And he's also trying to persuade the Greeks. So, and this is in Greece, is where he's at. That's where Corinth is, in Greece. Acts 18:5 says, but when Silas and Timothy came down from Macedonia, Paul began devoting himself completely to the word, solemnly testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Christ. Now, if you look at the book of Philippians, in Philippians, Paul thanks the Philippians in his letter for providing money for him, for providing a way for him to be able to live. So more than likely, this verse here points out when Silas and Timothy had came back from Philippi, where he left them a while ago, and from Macedonia and from Philippi, that they had brought some money with him, that now he didn't have to keep making those tents. Now he could just devote himself totally to preaching the word. Because it says Paul began devoting himself completely to the Word. So that he was able to step aside and not have to work so hard, so that way he could just preach the Word. 6 says, but when they resisted and blasphemed, he shook out his garments and said to them, your blood be on your own heads. I am clean. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles. Alright, so these guys got mad at him. They blasphemed him. That means they probably cussed him out. Alright, he had terrible treatment from his own people, from the Jews. But to do something like he just did now meant a whole lot more than what it would mean if me and you did it today somewhere. They would just think we're a little crazy or the guy's upset with us. The Jewish people, when you were to shake off your garments and shake the dust off them and walk out of it and point that out to them, that was like what they did to the Gentiles, which to the Jewish people, the Gentiles were dogs. I mean, they were worthless. They were racist. They were extremely racist against the Gentiles. They looked at the Gentiles as some sub-inferior type of human being. And Paul, the same thing they would do to these Gentiles that they hated so bad, Paul does it to them. Okay, he turns it around on them, and he shapes his garments off and says, your blood's on your own heads. I am clean. If you look through the Old Testament, this mentions a lot of times. I just wrote down one time, or 2 times in Ezekiel, chapter 18 and chapter 33. If you look in there, you'll see that it talks about that if you go and tell somebody the truth, the blood, the guilt of them, of their sin and all the punishment because they don't want to listen to you is no longer in your hands, it's all on their hands. It also says in there that if you don't share the gospel with people, the blood is on your hands, all right? And I always think about that. I think if I'm not bold enough to tell somebody about Jesus, when I get an opportunity, I feel guilty. I feel ashamed. I can tell you so many guys I knew in the Army that died or were killed or had suicide or something, and only one of them, out of all those guys I knew that had died, even while I was on fire for Christian for the Lord, did I really feel like I really shared the gospel with him. I poured my heart out. I pointed out everything in the truth to him. I answered his questions the best I could. And I don't believe he ever came to Jesus. But when he died, I did not feel ashamed as I did with other men, because I knew I had shared with him the truth of truths, the truth that could have saved him all eternity into glory. And whether he did it, what he did with it or not, was up to him. That wasn't up to me. The rest of the fellows, I was, telling them maybe, hey, would you come to church with me? Oh yeah, I'm a Christian. Oh yeah, I read my Bible. But I didn't get to the point was that I am a sinner, desperately wicked, hopeless without Jesus Christ, and so are you. And if you don't come to him, you won't have eternal life, but you'll have eternal punishment. I like it as R.C. Sproul, I heard him say once, and all I am is a beggar for bread, showing another beggar for bread where to go get the bread. Because the bread only comes from Jesus Christ, the bread of life. And only one guy had I actually done that with. But him, Paul didn't make that mistake. Everywhere Paul went, he shared the truth. It didn't matter. Last chapter we talked about Socrates and how he had been killed for introducing other gods or other ways that were foreign to them. And Paul probably knew that. And he still got up on the same hill in the same court of Areopagus and shared the truth about Jesus Christ, the unknown God that they were missing, and how important it was that they come to him and that he'd resurrected from the dead. So Paul lets them know, hey, your blood is on your own heads. And then he goes, and now on, I will go to the Gentiles. Well, he surely does go to the Gentiles, but you're going to see, even in this chapter today, he still goes back to the Jews, because he loves those Jews. And even though those Jews are so horrid to him, he still keeps going back to them all the time. And that's the way we should be too. Doesn't matter how bad somebody is to us, okay? We still keep trying to share Jesus with them, all right? I like the evangelical guy, David Wheeler. He wrote a book, and he said, how much you have to hate someone to know that they're going to hell, and you don't do anything at all about it. You don't even say anything about it. It's like one time, maybe I've told you this story before. If you ever take my CCW class, you hear it all the time, probably. But one time I was hunting down in Millersburg, and as I was hunting there in a cornfield, I walked into a giant marijuana field. I'm talking like over 20 plants, 6 feet high, 6 feet wide, all tended to very well, and I could smell marijuana feet away from me. And all of a sudden I walked into it, and I was like, whoa. And it kind of scared me, because all I had was a muzzle loader with me, because it was deer season with a muzzle loader, and I thought, oh, I got one shot here. The guy who's running this field probably has an AK-47 or an AR-15. He's probably well prepared to take out anybody who wants to touch his crop, because it was like a $50,000 crop. All right? And the guy wasn't there. And I thought, ooh. And I moved out, and I tried to hunt my deer, and I thought about it as I sat there, and I thought, if I don't say anything about this at all, and the next hunter comes along on another day, and this guy's here tending his field, and he sees him and he kills him, because who's going to know who killed him? Who's going to know where the guy's body was? It's like 50 square miles of national public hunting land. I would feel pretty guilty about that. I would be like, I didn't say anything. I felt danger, and I didn't say anything. I should say something. So I called the police. I called the game warden. Nobody answered my phone call. Left a message. I got all the way back here, an hour drive away, and they called me back and said, we want you to come back tonight and show us where the marijuana field is so we can destroy it. And I did. And I went all the way back there. And it made me feel good in the sense that nobody else is going to get hurt from these criminal guys if they would happen to step upon them while they were tending their marijuana. But that's the same way it is with us, with Jesus Christ and the gospel, even so much more. Because what can man do to us is nothing compared to what God can do to us in his wrath and his hatred of sin. And all they have to do is believe on Jesus. I mean, we have the answer. The answer is so simple, and yet it's so profound that most people never even comprehend it. Is to believe on Jesus, because he paid it all on the cross. Right? If we go to this next verse here, verse 7, it says, then he left there and went to the house of a man named Titius Justus, a worshiper of God, whose house was next to the synagogue. Crispus, the leader of the synagogue, believed in the Lord with all his household, and many of the Corinthians, when they heard, were believing and being baptized. Now I'm sure those Jews who he just told them, the blood is on your heads, I'm not dealing with you, I'm going to the Gentiles, are furious now. Because the leader of the synagogue, Crispus, is now converted to Christianity. All right? This wasn't just a small person or nobody inside the synagogue. This was the leader of the synagogue, now became a Christian. I mean, that's big. That's real big. That would be like us going to some kind of false religion church, and the head guy, the head leader, becomes a Christian. All right? It's huge. I'm sure they were furious with him. And then, to make it even worse for those guys, some guy named Titius Justus, who lived right next to the synagogue, all right, was where they were hanging out at, all right? And in fact, a lot of people believe that this guy, Titius Justus, also named Gaius, all right, when you put all these names together, his name's Gaius as well. He's mentioned in 1 Corinthians 1:14 as a new convert, and he's also mentioned in Romans 6:23 that it's the place where they met, the Corinthians met in the church. So he was probably a pretty wealthy man, had a nice big house next to the synagogue, big enough for now the church to start meeting. So they were probably meeting for church right next to the synagogue in this guy's house, who was a believer, right next to the place where they think these guys are a bunch of heretics, and they're meeting now right next to it, and the leader of the synagogue is also born again, and his whole family is being baptized, okay? I mean, how amazing is this, all right? It's totally amazing. Imagine the shockwaves going through the community right now, through the Jewish community. That guy that we kicked out of here, we didn't like him telling us all about how Jesus is the Messiah, and now our leader has gone with him, his family has gone with him, and the big house with the guy that probably was a big giver maybe or something next to the synagogue is now a believer in Jesus Christ, and they're having church in his house. It would be kind of crazy, all right? So here we see, this is some very motivating verses here. Verse 9 says, and the Lord said to Paul in the night by a vision, do not be afraid any longer, but go on speaking and do not be silent. For I am with you, and no man will attack you in order to harm you. For I have many people in this city. talk about an encouragement, huh? We have encouragement in the Word. We have encouragement in this Word. Paul had Jesus himself come to him in a vision in the night and tell him this. Now, you and I, when we think about Paul, when I just talked about Paul, what an amazing man he is, you wouldn't think that he would need this encouragement. You'd think he's a self-motivator. He's a guy you're not going to stop. Well, Jesus knows him a lot better than we know him. Who knows when? Maybe Paul was just about to throw in the towel. Maybe Paul had come to that point where he was about to give up, where he was so broken, so many times he'd been beaten, so many times he'd been treated terrible by his own people, the Jews, and yet Jesus comes to him at just the right time and encourages him, tells him to keep on preaching, tells him to not be silent, he tells him he's with him, and he tells him that nobody is going to harm you here. Now that had to be good news to Paul, because in Philippi he was beaten with rods, okay? Other places he was stoned. All right, stoned, usually you die. Oh no, we don't know. Did he die? Did he not die? I don't know. All kinds of horrible things had happened to Paul in the past, and now finally the Lord tells him, things are going to be okay here for you. Stay for a while. Preach. Don't be afraid. It was amazing. And we can also see, he told him, for I have many people in this city. Now at the time Paul showed up, were there a lot of believers? Probably not. You know, we had the two people that left Rome because the guy forced them out. We have this head leader of the synagogue just got saved. We've got this other prominent man who opened up his house for a church, Gaius, right there. But it probably wasn't that big yet. But you know what? God is not restricted as we are. God knows who's going to get saved. God knows who's going to get saved before you're even born. He knew it before Adam and Eve were even put on the face of the earth. God knew it. And he tells him, I have many people in this city. Just today, we were talking in Bible study, and we said how many times we look back and how we can see God's hand in our life before we even became a Christian. We could see God protecting us. We could see God's grace. I could see that I'm still alive here today because God has a purpose for me. Okay? And I'm sure most of you could look back the same way, even before you were a believer, before you confessed Christ. Think about how kinds of crazy things that another man may have died of, but you didn't die. But God took care of you because He knows who His people are. He knows who they're going to be. God is not confined to time as we're confined to time. God is as much in the future as He is here right now with us. All right? God sees it all completely clearly. And we can look at this as well. Other people in the Old Testament got discouraged. Moses got so discouraged once, he almost threw the towel in. He had a big speech with God and how upset he was and why did God bring him here and all these things were going on. Elijah, after his emotional high with killing all the prophets of the false prophets, he had an emotional low and just wanted to die, and God came out to him there. Jonah tried to run away from God, and God had a big fish swallow him up, keep him there for 3 days, and spit him back out on the way that he was to go. And the most of all, I think, is the book of Job. Okay, Job had lost all 10 of his children in one day. All 10 of them dead. Job had lost everything he had for wealth in life. He went from probably one of the wealthiest men in the city to probably the poorest man in the city. Had nothing. And his health was so bad, he was barely alive, okay? It was like his skin was like, by the teeth of his skin is all that he had right there. He had barely anything left to him, and yet God encouraged him as well, all right? So all these guys needed some encouragement, just like we need some encouragement, all right? So if you need encouragement this week, think about Acts chapter 18, verse 9 and 10, all right? Think about that. God is with us, all right? No man's going to cause us any harm. Yet, you know, it may cause us harm because this wasn't this specific to Paul. It may cause us harm, but we also have to remember what the rest of the Bible says. It says to not fear man, okay, but fear God, all right? Because what can man do to you? The most he can do is kill you, all right? God is the one who ultimately decides your eternal fate, all right? That's who we need to trust in. And if we know Him, we know that it also says in His Word that Jesus paid the price in full on the cross, so we know it's going to be okay in the end. All right? So we can take joy, and we can have that peace, and we can trust God that God has got us. A verse that correlates with this verse for affliction. It's a pretty intense one. I don't know if you can see it all from back there, but I'll read it slow. It says 2 Corinthians 4, verse 16 to 18. Therefore we do not lose heart, but through our outer man is decaying, yet our inner man is being renewed day by day. For momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. Alright? Now you think about when Paul wrote this later, after he left the Corinthians, alright? When he wrote this to the Corinthians, the 2 Corinthians, he says, for momentary light affliction. Now, 5 times he'd been whipped 39 times by the Jews. Alright? These are probably whippings that would probably kill half of us if we went through that kind of whipping. He'd been beaten with rods. He'd been stoned. He'd been put in prison. Horrible things had happened to him. And what does he call it? Momentary light affliction. Now that is hard as nails. Alright? In the army we call that guy hard as nails. Because he's like, momentary light affliction I went through. I'm sure at some of those times, I mean, there were times when you read the Bible and Paul says that he was all the way at wit's end. But yet, you know what? He's able to look back on it now when he's looking in the future for eternity and think this is nothing compared to what Jesus suffered on the cross for me. This is nothing compared to what I am going to get into eternity. And he really points out this is the secret of happiness. All right? If you want the secret of happiness, the secret of joy in your life, it's right here. Because it says that the things which are not seen is what you have faith in, not the here and now and the brokenness. This isn't going to always be. But the things which are not seen, for the things which are seen are temporal. Everything here is just temporary. But the things that are not seen are eternal. When you're able to realize that life is not about the right here and the right now, and this is it. When you realize, as it says in Ecclesiastes 3:11, that God has put within every single one of us, every single human being, believe it or not, a sense of eternity, that you will live forever. And when you realize that, and you realize what Jesus has done for you, John 3:16, that He came, that He loved you so much, that God sent His only Son to die for you, that whosoever believes, not everybody, but whosoever believes, shall be saved, shall be there. When you can realize that, you can know at the end of the day, it's okay. If you go through a hard project, if you're trying to make some money and you're stressed out and you're working hard for a year, but you know at the end of that year, everything's going to be good. You're going to get a good payout. You can go through that hard project. You can go through those hard times because you already know for sure something's guaranteed. All right? We can be for sure and guaranteed because when Jesus said, it is finished on the cross, He's paid for all our sin, and then on top of that, He rose from the dead, okay, the only person in history that rose up from the dead to show us that death could not hold Him down, to show us that everything that He said was true, and that He was the Lord of life itself. When He did this, we can know there is eternal hope beyond any hope we could ever grab on this side of heaven. And that eternal hope should cause us a joy so deep in our heart that no matter how bad things get, everything's going to be okay. All right? No matter what, everything is going to work out to be okay for those who believe. All right? And these were words I wrote on here that are born out of persecution and hardship. And yet those kind of words can encourage us. Makes me think, I'm a guy that kind of likes to watch the movies when I have some time. And I liked that Braveheart movie years ago. And he gets up there and he says, you know, if you fight today, if you turn away, you'll be a slave, you'll be this and that. And if you do fight, you may die. But if you don't fight, you will never know what you may have had. You know, what would you rather do? Would you rather give it your all and see hope? Or would you just give up and stay in your darkness there, basically? And everybody's like, yeah! I can't say that all right. And if I was smarter, maybe I'd put it up on video clip here, a speech or something. But let me tell you, that was motivating to me. And it's those kind of words sometimes that born out of our persecution, our hardship can motivate us. Sometimes some fellow may tell you some hard stuff that he went through and hard times. And you get to listen to him and you think, wow, this is an amazing story. That was some hard times. And then that guy tells you, that he's so happy that he's got Jesus. And he can thank God that all those hard times went on because he came to know Jesus Christ through all those hard times. It'll motivate you. It'll make you strong. I can think a guy once told me how both of his kids died. You know, his son committed suicide. His daughter fell in a lake right there. His wife got depressed for months. And at the end of the depression, she came back to God. And he said, "Why? What brought you back to God?" She said, "Because who else do I have? There is no one else. No one is higher than God. Who can we turn to except for God alone?" There isn't some kind of make-believe, fictitious world that there's all these gods like the Greeks had or Romans had that you can just pick and choose and have what you want. You're just living in a make-believe world, and I tell you, you're going to die, you're going to be judged, and you're going to burn in hell forever because it doesn't matter what you say. We read the book of Job today, and in Job, God tells him, he shows up out of a whirlwind. And he tells Job after all these years of affliction and pain and troubles, and Job was begging for a lawyer to tend his case before God, knowing that no lawyer could, but wishing he could. And God shows up and he says, "You'll stand up like a man, and you'll answer me when I ask you questions, and you will teach me." And he tells Job 65 questions. 65 questions between chapter 39 and 41. And you know what Job says at the end of all? He goes, "Now you can answer me." He says, "I am so insignificant before you." And he put his hand over his mouth. And he said, "How could I say anything back to the Lord God Almighty?" And he goes, "I tried to answer and I can't answer. I can't say a thing." And then God went on and beat him up for about 2 more chapters. All right? Because he didn't quite know it all the way yet. But I tell you, there is hope in Christ, and it is an eternal hope. And Job needed to be reminded, and when God reminded him, all that stuff he said he was going to do, he said he was going to say, he knew, "I can't say a thing. I humble myself before the Lord Almighty, the creator of heaven and earth, who comes to even speak to me, have mercy upon me." And that's all that any of us can do. All right? There is no other thing. We can't do things. We can't be like the devil who tells Eve, you know, "You'll be like God if you eat this fruit." We all the time want to pretend that we can be like God, that we can run our own lives. But in reality, we're all slaves to one of 2 things. We're slaves to Satan and sin, or we're slaves to Christ. I'd much rather be a slave to Christ, who's a good God, and a good God all the time, who loves me, and who has good plans for me in my life, than a slave to somebody who hates me desperately, who's the father of liars, and wants only terrible things for me. All right? One more verse here to motivate you on this passage. That's how much it motivated me, encouraging one. Isaiah 40, 29 to 31. "He gives strength to the weary, and to him who lacks might he increases power. Though youths grow weary and tired, and vigorous young men stumble badly, they will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary." All right? This is for those who believe in the Lord. It says you're going to, even though hard times are going to come, tough stuff comes, you're going to rise up like an eagle with wings and fly above it all. I tell you a personal story is when I was in Special Forces at the medic course, this man who had trained me how to be a medic was a worker there, and he had leukemia or something, and they told him, "You have to go home, Art, or you're going to catch an illness and die here." And when he went home, he died within 3 months, probably because this was everything in his life, was working and giving back, and it meant a lot to him. You take that away from him, man, it can be rough on a guy. But he died, and when he died, he had a funeral that was an incredible funeral. I hope one day my funeral could be this good. I hope if I do any funerals, I can make a funeral this good. I've done some, but I haven't done one as good as this, I don't think. So here this guy is laid in his coffin, and he's got his blue sweatshirt on with a big eagle on the front of it with this Bible verse. That's when he's laid up in his coffin. He doesn't have a 3-piece suit on. He's got a big blue sweatshirt with this Bible verse right on the front of his chest. So when you looked at Art Dead's body, the gospel was coming out at you is what was happening. And then on top of that, he had his silver wings pinned on his chest, because Art was a Green Beret. Art was in Vietnam. Art was probably one of the oldest medics. He was like the first warrant officer PA there was back then. And Art had his silver wings pinned on his chest. He had a little army photo by him. And then he had a funeral service, when they left, put him in the ground, there was a come to Jesus funeral service. All they talked about was Jesus and the gospel, and where Art had his faith, and how you need to put your faith there as well if you want to travel the same route that Art went. And I was like, wow. And these army guys, a lot of them weren't Christian, and this is what they saw. I mean, what a beautiful funeral Art had for sharing the gospel. But this is what he had. He had that Bible verse right on him. And you know what? Even though Art's body was laying in that casket, dead, I know Art wasn't in that casket. Art was with Jesus in heaven, because that's who he put his faith his whole life. That's who he walked with. And he knew it so well that he told his wife, you know what, because he knew he was dying, he said, I want to have this blue sweatshirt, and I want to wear my sweatshirt with this Bible verse on it, because I know I'm going to mount up like wings on eagles, and I'm going to fly away one day, and I'm going to be okay. And he sure did. We're going back there to Acts 18:11, and it says he settled there 1 year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them. All right, so 1.5 years. All these other places Paul spent, it was like a couple of weeks. All right, maybe a month, maybe just a few days. Here he spent 1.5 years after God encouraged him and told him to stay there and speak there. And then he wrote 2 letters to him. And after this place, we're going to see next week, he goes to Ephesus, where the book of Ephesians was written to, and he stays there for 2 to 3 years. All right? Paul invested himself. All right? And Paul didn't forget about the other people. Paul wrote letters back to the Corinthians. Okay? Paul was concerned. Paul was like a father with his children. You know, it wasn't good to just leave your kids. He wanted to stay with his kids. He wanted to encourage them. He wanted to bless them. And he wanted to raise them up in the Lord. Just as we should with people that we see come to the Lord. Acts 18:12 says, but while Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews with one accord rose up against Paul and brought him before the judgment seat, saying, this man persuades men to worship God contrary to the law. Now remember, I told you how mad the Jews must have been. First, he treated them like the way they treat the Gentiles, who they hated. He did the same treatment back to them. Then their head boss gets saved and gets baptized. Then the guy whose house is next to the synagogue starts having church in his house. So they're pretty mad. So they go to the proconsul. Back then, if you ever watch these Roman movies, there's like 2 proconsuls per area. And it's the job, you grab a hold of the guy and be like, hey, I got a court case for you to decide. I got something for you to lay judgment on. So he grabs this guy Gallio, or the Jews do, and they tell him that. All right? And they say it's contrary to the law. Now, Paul, in him going through with this court case and everything and not running away or evading, you're going to see it's a good outcome to this court case. It set a precedent that for the next 10 to 12 years, the gospel would be proclaimed under Roman law. 10 to 12 more years. I can picture that with America. All right? I can picture with America. I surely know, all right, that some people are trying to take our right away to free speech. Some people are trying to take our right away to have church. They're trying to take our right away to preach what we can from the pulpit. But now, fortunately, in our time in America, we're allowed to say whatever we want from the pulpit. Our free speech is freer than free. Anybody can say anything they want. Praise God. For a time. I don't think it's going to be like this forever. I think we're going to have some harsh times ahead of us. There's many people that would claim tolerance when really they're tolerant only of their tolerance. Their tolerance, if they're here, they're tolerant of where they are and here. But they're not tolerant of anything over here, okay? You should be tolerant of everything if you're tolerant, okay? I'm tolerant of everything. I love to talk to anybody, okay? I don't care if they tell me they hate God and they're this and that. You know what, brother? Let me be your friend. Let me try to converse with you. Let me try to share the truth with you. Let me help you see the love of God, okay? I'm not going to just say, shut your face, I don't want to hear anything you have to say. But there are people today that are trying to do that. But because Paul went to this court case, almost like the way we have with Supreme Court cases, like one case gets decided, for a long time it's that way, until another case gets decided. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. For Paul, and for the rest of Christians, this was very good in what he did. It says, but when Paul was about to open his mouth, Gallio said to the Jews, if it were a matter of wrong or a vicious crime, O Jews, it would be reasonable for me to put up with you. But if there are questions about words and names and your own law, look after it yourself. I am unwilling to be a judge of these matters. So he basically tells them, like, shut up, you whining Jews. This is your law. This isn't Roman law. We don't care about what's going on in your sector or your religion. You take care of it yourself, all right? And this was a good thing, because now all these other guys would get word of this, and they'd be like, you know what? When everybody starts saying how awful the Christians are, just leave it be, okay? They looked at it as just as much freedom was given to the Jews to be Jews. Christians now had freedom to be Christians, all right? So this is it's like a monumental court case. For a lawyer, this would mean a lot. They'd be like, I refer to the court case of Gallio and what he said. Now, this guy Gallio, he had a brother named Seneca, who was a famous Stoic philosopher. Not a guy that would be a Christian, I'm sure. Right? We talked about the Stoics before. But he was a famous Stoic philosopher, and he said something about his brother. He said, no mortal is as pleasant to anyone as Gallio is to everybody. That's a nice thing to say about him, all right? So the guy was a pleasant man that did this, and he says he's pleasant to everybody, all right? Unfortunately for Gallio, if you look farther in time, the Roman emperor eventually thought that he might be suspect of chaos, and he had him killed, all right? So Gallio had a rough end in the end, all right? But the purposes served well for the Christians, and it's like that verse in Romans 8:28. God will use the good, the evil, all things to work together for those who love God. And this caused the Christians about 10 to 12 years of peace, that he ended up not doing anything to Paul at the time. It says then, the next verse, and he drove them away from the judgment seat. All right? And they all took hold of Sosthenes, the leader of the synagogue. All right? The old leader got saved. The new leader, they grabbed a hold of him, and they began to beat him in front of the judgment seat. But Gallio was not concerned about any of these things. So the Jews, they're having a bad day. First, they're trying to shut up the Christians, trying to get this stuff to stop, all this madness and anger they have going on. And then they bring it to the Romans, who were in charge, because they were basically like an occupied people. They weren't like in charge, the Jews, wherever they were, right? They were under the authority of others. They bring it to him to get some help from the law. That guy doesn't help them at all. And then what do the Jews do? They beat up their leader, all right? Their leader, probably because, as you'll see many times in life, either with yourself or other things, when things go bad, the leader is to blame, all right? I hope you guys never try to blame me and beat me up. But if you do, I still love you anyways. I hope not. But here, they blame their leader, and they start beating him. And right there in the court case area, and the head boss doesn't even care. He doesn't concern himself. All right? Now, here's something that's some good news. If you look at 1 Corinthians 1:1, it talks about a brand new convert, and his name is Sosthenes. So think about the irony with this. The head of the synagogue got saved before in an earlier verse, and his family. Now the next in charge, who was trying to persecute Paul, gets saved later. All right? So look at the works God's doing here. And we talked about suffering. I wonder if you talked to Sosthenes, he'd be like, if I hadn't got beat up real good, bad back then, I probably wouldn't realize how evil my own people, the Jews, were, and come to Christ and listen to what that Christian guy Paul was saying. All right? Think about that. All these things work together. So Sosthenes, if it's the same one, we can't, it's not like a last name, it's a common name too, but if it's the same one, this guy becomes a convert as well later. And it says, Paul, having remained many days longer, took leave of the brethren and put out to sea for Syria. And with him were Priscilla and Aquila. In Centuria, he had his hair cut, for he was keeping a vow. So now finally Paul leaves Corinthians, okay, 18 months later, all right? And this vow, everybody's like, what is the vow? What did the vow mean? It was probably a vow that he took after he got encouraged by God in that vision in the night. He took this vow that was a Nazirite vow where he would grow his hair long, and if somebody said, hey, why is your hair long? He'd be like, because you know what the Lord told me? The Lord encouraged me. The Lord came to me. The Lord told me to stay here, that things are going to be okay. I bet when he was before the court case in Gallio, because before things hadn't gone so good for Paul. Sometimes he'd be getting whipped, beat with rods, thrown in jail. He had peace because he's like, you know what? I trust God because God told me things would be okay. And that's the way we should be in life as well. Even though hard times may come, unknown stuff goes on in our life, we can trust God and have that kind of peace. All right? So he cuts his hair. I got something to say about vows. I found some interesting things. All right? Paul, being a Jew, continued to practice vows. That was a big deal to the Jews. There was a lot of works and type of things. It wasn't mandatory for him, but was regarded as helpful to spiritual health. Now, I can remember a while ago, I read this book by a guy named Baxter. I think it's Richard Baxter, but I'm not sure. And it's about spiritual discipline, all right? And it has like 12 things, like fasting, giving, all kinds of things that you would kind of do to yourself to discipline yourself spiritually. And it, once again, that book says too that this isn't what you have to do, but these are good things for you to do to be a Christian. All right. If we go back to the Reformers in 1500, when they left the Catholic Church, they rejected vows because they thought they inferred a works righteousness. All right, and they thought that it was imposing human obligations that were not demanded by Christ. So they got so mad at the Catholic Church, they were like, "We'll never do a vow again." But then the head of the Reformers, all right, really, there's like two big heads, is Martin Luther and John Calvin. John Calvin said he regarded vows as a valuable tool, a tool for personal spiritual discipline that laid down rules for their use. Handled discerningly and with imagination, vows could be a vow-given resource to strengthen, resolve, and enable one to rise above immediate circumstances and to restore continuity to our lives fractured by the pressures of a disorientating world. All right? That's a lot said right there by Calvin with vows, but it makes good sense, you know? How many times have you prayed for God to help you, to heal you, to do whatever, and God has helped you and healed you, and then you forget all about that. You know, you just go through and you forget what God did. When you took a vow, it was like you were so thankful you stayed with it. It can make me think of Martin Luther himself, even though these reformers are so against it, it said, is once when he was in a lightning storm and he thought he was going to die, he made a promise to God that he's going to serve him his whole life if he lives. And he did live, and he did serve God his whole life, okay? And that was before even his point of conversion later. But that was a vow as well. And we can make vows as well. We can make a vow, you know, I'm not going to eat one day a week for one meal at that time because I'm going to think about the Lord that time, because I'm going to honor Him. And I don't have to tell anybody that. I can just do that myself. You can make a vow, a promise to yourself that, you know, I'm going to read the Bible this year, get all the way through the Bible. You can make vow of all kinds of things. Use your imagination and help it to get you to walk the straight and narrow path after Christ, okay? So there are ways you can do vows. Now, don't look at a vow, though, as getting you into the kingdom of heaven. Whatever vows you do, as much as you ever work, will never get you there. Christ alone will get you there. You trust in Christ alone for your salvation. But in the meantime, after you're saved, in order so you can be a better Christian, in order so you can grow more, you can make vows, you can practice spiritual discipline. Vows can help us not to forget and to be thankful and put things first that are most important. And here we see Paul's going back to the Jews again. Remember, he told the Jews before, I am leaving you, I'm going to the Gentiles. Well, here it says they came to Ephesus, the Ephesians there, and he left them there. Now he himself entered the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews. When they asked him to stay for a longer time, he did not consent. Okay, sometimes he didn't stay, sometimes he left. Look what he tells them. But taking leave of them and saying, I will return to you again if God wills. He set sail from Ephesus. All right? Paul knew everything's in God's hands. All right? I mean, he had a pretty good time there. He had 18 months in Corinthians, 2 to 3 years in Ephesus. They wanted him to stay longer. And he says, no, I got to go. If God wills it, then it'll be okay. But he put it into God's hands, okay? And it's in the will of God. Everything's in the will of God. And even if you think that you're out of the will of God, God is still allowing what He allows to go on right there, okay? Now, I don't recommend you do things that aren't right, that are just against the Bible, because you're going to pay the consequences for those things, all right? Look at King David. If you look at 2 Samuel, the second half of 2 Samuel, all it is a very sad life that King David lived after Bathsheba. There were very few highs in his life after he did his great sin. Yes, he was forgiven, completely forgiven. I believe David's sitting in heaven right now, but yet he suffered the rest of his life for those consequences. So we've got to make sure that we're obedient and we try to do the best that we can. And it's really in obedience that we can find true joy. You know, I'm talking about that true joy about eternity. Also, in the right here today, besides knowing about eternity, is in obedience. That I'm going to obey the Lord today. I'm going to follow His commands and do what He tells me to do. So He says, I will return if God wills. Lord willing, He said. Then He says, when He had landed at Caesarea, He went up and greeted the church and went down to Antioch. So now He's back on His, this is the end of His second mission trip. Next week we'll start His final mission trip number 3. And He goes back to Antioch, which was the first Gentile church that was formed. Alright? So remember today, I don't have a conclusion slide, but I want you to help remember some things. Is that God is going to encourage you, okay? God encourages you. Look at that verse itself, 9 and 10. But God encouraged you to keep going. Church, once with each other, we should encourage one another. We should build each other up. We shouldn't kick somebody when they're down. We should love them more when they're down. Help them up, okay? Be good to them. We need to encourage one another and build one another up. Look at this example throughout this whole chapter. He ran into other Christians who had made it out of Rome and had come over there. Other people got saved. Churches got established. He was always with people. You don't see Paul all by himself. He had Timothy and Silas coming along and bringing a money bag from somewhere to help him out so he didn't have to keep making the tents and he could do more. I mean, it was a community. It was people working together, people encouraging one another throughout the entire Bible. That's what we'll always see. We don't see a guy who's a Christian all by himself, far removed from everybody, that no church is good enough to go to because nobody's right. When people tell me that, I know that guy's got a lot of issues, man. We've got to pray for that guy because he's got so many issues. How can he get by? He doesn't even have encouragement of anybody, okay? And it's a rough way. In fact, most of those guys, they discourage you from going to your church. They're like, don't go to any church. Don't you do it either. It's like a magnet. It's like a disease trying to spread. Paul wasn't like that. He was always in the community. They would build each other up and encourage each other. And most importantly, Jesus Himself encouraged Paul, okay? And we should be encouraged by Jesus Himself because we know the gospel. We know the truth. We know that Jesus died for us, for you. Not just for me, but for you, for every single person who will call upon the name of the Lord. Jesus died and He paid the price in full. You know, the more I read the Bible, the more I get into things, the more angry it makes me when I hear about churches or other things telling you that you have to do, you believe in Jesus, but you also have to do this, and you have to do that, and you do this. And you know what? You may never make it in the end anyways. And it makes me so mad because it is pure blasphemy. It's like screaming out, God, I don't believe what you said you did. I don't believe that you paid for all my sin. I believe that maybe you did it for somebody else, but I'm such a wicked fellow, there's no way you can do it for me. And you're sinning in doing that because you're doubting God. Okay? We can't doubt God. We've got to trust Him. We've got to put ourselves in His arms, just like Job did after all that time. And he said, I am so insignificant. And he put his hand over his mouth. That's what we have to do, and trust God. Okay? We don't have all the answers. We're never going to have all the answers. All right? Because we're man, we're finite, and He's infinite. We're never going to understand everything that God understands. Otherwise, it would be pretty obvious that we just made up God and He's make-believe. Because we could understand everything. He is outside our understanding in a lot of ways. In some ways, He's given us His Word, and we can understand a lot of Him, enough of Him that we need to understand on this side of heaven. We keep searching and keep knowing Him more. But sometimes we're going to run into situations and we just don't know. We just got to trust Him. It's in His hands, and He knows the big picture, and everything's going to be okay. Just like it was with Job. Even though Job never really got an answer for all that stuff happened, he was told, you better trust me. You better trust me and listen to me and believe in me, and let me be glorified in everything that I will be glorified in. Alright, so we'll bow our heads today and pray, and we're also going to take communion. So I'm going to pray about communion. Lord Jesus, Lord, I thank You so much for this day. I thank You for every person that's here today, Lord.
Lord, I thank you for every single soul, Lord. Lord, I believe the soul is the person's mind, the will, the emotions, their spirit. It's within them. It's every thought that they have. It's inside their soul, Lord. And I thank you for every soul that you created that sits here today before you, before the most holy God, before God Almighty. And we know that your presence is right here with us in this room, Lord, inside of us, knowing us inside and out, since you are our creator and you are our sustainer, Lord. Lord, I ask you that today, that this message would reach deep, that your Holy Spirit would speak to those who have heard it, Lord, and that it would change their lives. Lord, that they would come to be encouraged by you. Lord, that they would come to make vows before you, to walk after you, and to have spiritual discipline before you, Lord. Lord, that as we get ready to partake of your Holy Communion, Lord, that remind us of a vow, Lord, of a vow that you made to us, that you will return one day, and that you are coming back. And that every time we take this cup, every time we take this bread, we are testifying both to ourselves, to one another, and to this world that we believe in you, we proclaim you, and we know that you will return for us, and that we know that you paid the price for our sin that we could never pay, Lord, or even assist in paying, but that you did it all, Lord Jesus. Lord, I ask you this day, as people are here today, that if there be any people who are not Christians, who do not believe, Lord, that they would check themselves, Lord, that they would seek you, that they'd search you out, and that you'd find them, and that you'd save them, Lord. Lord, that they'd repent, that they'd beat their chest and say, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. I know I'm hopeless without you. I need you in my life. And Lord, that you draw them and that you would save them, Lord. And Lord, for those who are saints here today, those who are believers, Lord, I ask you that you help us to check ourselves. Help us to look at things, sins that we may have fallen into, relaxed type of ways, or whatever it may be that's far from you. Help us to consider it in a moment of silence. Help us to repent of it, and help us to walk on afresh with you, Lord Jesus. We'll take a moment of silent prayer, and then we'll take communion.